You may remember the story of former New Hampshire prep school student Owen Labrie. He was accused of raping a 15-year-old former classmate. After a 2-week trial this summer, Labrie was acquitted of the more serious felony rape charges, but was found guilty of misdemeanor counts of sexual assault and endangering the welfare of a child, as well as a felony charge of computer-related seduction. Before his conviction, he was headed to Harvard on a full scholarship. Now he's facing prison and a lifetime on a sex offender registry. For the first time, Labrie sat down to talk about the incident that has changed his life. The interview appears in the latest edition of Newsweek, and the writer Matthew Cooper joins me from Washington. So you had the chance to sit down with him, Matt. What was most startling to you or impressive about you or mind-changing when you got a chance to sit down and have a conversation with this young man?
Well, Contessa, I'd read a lot about how he was very bright, very charming, but I was still taken back by how bright and charming he was. I mean, this is a very impressive kid in some ways. He was a scholarship kid who, got into arguably the best prep school in the country and aced it and was captain of the soccer team and had a kind of amazing adolescence. So I was more impressed by his kind of ability to handle adults than I even suspected. In terms of mind changing about the case, I guess I was most surprised by how adamant he was that he had done the right thing by not taking a very lenient plea deal. At the beginning of this case, he'd been offered as little as 3 weeks in jail and no sex crime charge, and it all could have been behind him. He's adamant that he did the right thing by not taking that.
He's out at home with his parents now while his case is on appeal, but I guess there are very strict rules regarding what he's doing. Regardless of what happens, his life has changed forever just by being on trial in such a high-profile way. How's he dealing with that?
Well, he's I think like anyone in the limelight who's not used to it is surprised by that. I mean, he had this kind of golden childhood. Now he's on the Vermont sex offender registry, and he's has to be home by 5 or so every night. So, and he's not going to Harvard the way he had planned. He'd gotten a full scholarship, so he's taking it fairly hard. But look, the trial and the notoriety are in some way, well, they certainly owe to his original crimes, but also the fact that he chose a trial instead of a plea bargain. So, this has been brought on himself.
What do his parents have to say about all this?
Well, they're very protective and of their son. They're totally standing behind him. These are folks without a lot of money, but they have really stood behind him as he's racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. And so he's had the embrace of family during this.
You mentioned about Harvard. He was planning to be a divinity student at Harvard. Is he confident that God is going to intervene and that what he sees as the just outcome will happen?
I didn't get the sense that he thought that there would be kind of the outcome that God would somehow intervene and he'd get the outcome he preferred. I think his was more a resigned, some good will come of this kind of approach, rather than like, I'm going to get freed at the last minute.
What does he say about his accuser?
Well, he said pretty much what he did in court, which is that, he tells a completely different story. His story, which the jury did not believe at all, is that the two of them were rolling around the floor of a building after hours at this prep school, and that he decided on his own not to have sex, that he realized she was too young and it was inappropriate, and he decided not to. That is a very different story than what the accuser is saying, which is that she was raped. The jury kind of split the difference. They said that there had been sex, but they didn't find him, they didn't rule that there was consent. They didn't have enough evidence to prove that there had been a rape. So he was acquitted on that charge.
So, Matt, where does the case stand now?
Well, Contessa goes to this New Hampshire's Supreme Court, and like a lot of these cases, it can take a long time. They've got a few more months before they have to file their briefs. The court may not rule till next year. So in the meantime, he's on a suspended sentence, and you know, he stays at home, and he's got this curfew, and he's on the sex offender registry, and he just kind of you know, putters along till then.
And finally, Matt, I know I'm putting you on the spot as a journalist because you're supposed to stay objective, but did you come away with a sense of his guilt or innocence?
Well, as I said in the piece, I don't know what happened that night. I really don't. I'm not dodging the question. I certainly think one of the more interesting issues that comes from this, and that applies to all teenagers, is how we treat some of these offenses when they're between teens, some above the age of consent, some below. He's looking at a very serious felony charge that he was convicted of for having used a computer to reach out to this girl. If he'd done it simply by talking to her, he wouldn't have faced that charge. So a lot of interesting questions spring from this case, not just for him, but for all kids his age.
Matt Cooper, the article is very compelling. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us a bit about it.
Thanks, Contessa.